Hey, good afternoon. Today I'm presenting a data-backed operating brief for Commissioner Bone, and the goal of this analysis was to create the cafe's point of view from the point of sale data to better understand how the business is performing and how the business can perform. The goal of today's analysis is to provide a clear view to the owner of when demand happens, which products matter the most, and how to plan staffing, inventory, and promotions with more confidence and according to what the data is showing. Cool. So here's the roadmap for the presentation. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to frame the business question and objective just so that we know that what we're working towards here. Second, I'll walk through the data coverage, cleaning, and methodology. Third, I'll show the core business performance trends, revenue, traffic, ticket size, and those other metrics. Fourth, I'll cover the key product and operating insights, including what sells and when it sells. And then fifth, I'll walk through the cappuccino forecast for the next 8 weeks. And then finally, I'll close with recommendations and limitations. The goal throughout is to keep this practical and owner facing, just so that we know what the data says, why it matters, and what actions it actually supports. So if I had to summarize the entire analysis into 4 points, it would be these right here. First, this is a coffee-led business. The cafe is the dominant revenue category, while Spicing plays the role of the secondary attachment, but again, it's coffee-led. Second, demand is concentrated Monday through Friday, especially in the morning through the mid-afternoon. Third, cappuccino is the flagship product by both volume and revenue. And fourth, the 8 week forecast points to about 4,910 cappuccinos and roughly 18.3 thousand euros in gross cappuccino revenue with a clear weekly rhythm. The bottom line from the data is that the cafe should be staffed and stocked like a coffee first weekday morning business, and cappuccino should set the rhythm, the rhyme, and everything else for the short term and the long term planning. So the owner's challenge here is not whether the cafe is good. It already is. We know it is, and instinctively he knows it is as well. The challenge is understanding how the business actually breathes across the week with evidence rather than just that instinct alone. So the objective of my analysis here was to make sure that the data is useful in 3 ways. First, we want to help the owner operate with more confidence by matching staffing to the hours and the days where he actually has those high sales. Second, to stock with intent by protecting the inputs behind the highest velocity items and avoiding waste on slower products. That means making sure that we are stocked in those cappuccinos, the number one lead volume product. And then we do have those supporting products, but just as the data is backing them. And third, to plan with foresight by using a forward view of demand to support weekly decisions on ordering, promotions, and cash flow. In other words, the analysis is meant to be an operating tool, not just an academic exercise. We want to make sure that he could actually implement what we found and be able to drive more revenue and make better decisions for his cafe. So the analysis uses more than 2.5 years of real POS data covering from January 10th, 2022 to September 12th, 2024. In total, the data set includes over 244,000 line items and 135,000 invoices with an average ticket of $6.86 6.86 euros, not dollars. 6.86 euros. From a workflow standpoint, I followed the crisp DM style process. I started by translating the owner's questions into measurable outcomes. Then I prepared the data by checking the structure, the missingness, pricing consistency, and transaction grade. After we've taken all that data, we normalized it. I explored the business across transaction, product, and time dimensions. And then finally, I built a daily cappuccino forecast because the cappuccino is the highest impact and the most stable product in the cafe. And it's going to be the one that drives the best output and the best revenue for the owner himself. The important thing here, though, is to emphasize that the data was cleaned and structured to support real business questions. We're just not in here just making charts. We're making sure that we could actually act on the data and we can move forward with the recommendations that I've laid out for the owner. So this slide here answers a simple but important question. It's, is the cafe growing because customers are spending more per visit, or is it because there's more customers that are actually coming inside the cafe? The answer is that the business is actually growing mainly because of more visits, not materially bigger tickets. The monthly gross sales, they've been trending upward period over period, and monthly transaction counts rise amongst them. But by contrast, the average transaction value stays relatively stable, mostly in a band around the mid 6 to low €7 range. Because of that, it shows that the growth is being driven by the traffic and demand volume, not because of major increase in basket size. It also means that the cafe's performance is especially sensitive to traffic management, throughput, and staffing during busy periods. One note here is that September 2024 is a partial month because the data ends, so we can't use that data as a complete one to one statement. Here. Cool. And then this slide here, we get into the heart of what the cafe actually is, the business model. The data shows that the cafe is a coffee business with a food attachment, not a food business, not a side drink business. It's a cafe business. It's a coffee business. Cappuccino is the strongest product by far. It's supported by the data, and then it's followed by other espresso drinks like the cafe latte or the flat white. And then at times select food items, especially like the pastries and the tarts. We see sales there, but they're really playing an important supporting role in the cafe and the espresso based drinks rather than being their own individual product. At the category level, the cafe it dominates the top line. Spicing is the strongest supporting group, and everything else is pretty small by comparison. What that tells us is that the strategy needs to be to protect that coffee core while using food as an attachment lever to lift tickets. So for the owner, the implication is pretty clear here. The economic engine is coffee, and food should be managed as a complement to that core rather than being a separate growth engine. So this is where the data really becomes operationally actionable, right? Customer demand is concentrated and not evenly distributed. By day or by hour, the cafe still remains the strongest from about 8 a.m. to roughly through mid-afternoon. And then the transaction activity really falls off after that 5 p.m. our time, or 1700. By day of the week, Tuesday and Wednesdays are the busiest. Weekdays carry the week overall. Saturday is lighter, and Sunday is near zero, which this probably reflects that they're either closed or they have very limited business on that day. Maybe they have shorter hours or people just aren't coming through. But as we see, the core is going to be that Monday through Friday and that 8 to about 5 p.m. Payment behavior is also very concentrated here. What we saw was that MasterCard leads clearly, cash is still meaningful, and then Visa follows behind. So the takeaway from that is that the center of gravity of the business is really, as I just now mentioned, it's weekday mornings through mid-afternoon. The staff prep and inventory should peak there rather than being spread evenly across the week. And this is going to be the strongest operational findings in the entire analysis that allow us to act on it to make sure that we are staffing in the right way. We do have stock during the right times, and we are moving operationally to drive revenue rather than just having a blanket strategy around. So here for the forecasting, what I focused on is the cafe, their flagship product, their cappuccino. The choice there is very intentional for 3 reasons. The first is that it's the single highest revenue driving the highest volume product. Second is that the daily quantity is more useful than revenue for staffing, prep, and inventory planning. So basically, if we're able to analyze this and know exactly what we need, we know how we should be staffing, how we should be prepping, and how much inventory we actually need to have. Third is that the data shows a clear Monday through Sunday rhythm, which means the weekly seasonality is the nature to the nature cycle to model from here. The model used is an ETS time series model with weekly seasonality. The fitted form was ETS as well, which means it's more additive error, no explicit trend component, and then there's added seasonality as well. On held out data, the model achieved a RMSE of 25.5 and an MAPE of 25.8%. So what does this mean? In practical terms, that means that the forecast captures the weekly pattern reasonably well, though it still misses some of the day-to-day variability that you would expect in a cafe environment where weather, promotions, tourism, and events can all matter. So this slide here is the practical forward view. Over the next 56 days, the model forecasts about 4,910 cappuccinos averaging 87.7 per day, which translates to about 18,331 in gross cappuccino revenue in euros. More importantly, the forecast keeps the cafe's weekly rhythm intact. Strong weekdays continue, a softer day remains built into the pattern, and the shape of the demand is consistent with what we saw historically. So what we're doing here is that this is not just a number that we're just coming up with. This is an actual planning tool for what's going to be happening, what we can forecast, and what we can predict over these next 56 days. For the owner, this means that the cappuccino alone cannot be used as a reliable sign for short-term ordering and prep. We're going to need the milk, we're going to need beans, takeaway cups, and related inputs as well that we need to be able to plan around the rhythm of the cappuccino, because if cappuccino is constrained, then the entire cafe is going to be constrained, and we're going to be constraining its flagship revenue engine, which is basically going to be chopping down those profits. So, 5 moves the owner can act on for this quarter. Based on the analysis, these are going to be the 5 strongest things that I believe that he should start to act on. The first is going to be to staff to weekday mornings and midday, especially around Tuesday to Wednesday and the peak and broader 8 a.m. through the mid-afternoon window. Second, protect cappuccino inputs by building inventory rules around the forecast so that milk, beans, and takeaway cups can never be the constraint of the sale. That means that if somebody comes and orders a cappuccino, we have all the cups in their size. One, if somebody does order a cappuccino, we already have the beans to make the cappuccino. And 3, if they want to add whatever kind of milk they do want to add that we do have and we showcase, we make sure that we do have those in stock for them. Third is that they're going to use the food as an attachment lever, especially pastries and tarts, to lift the ticket size alongside coffee. We don't want that to be its own independent. We just want to make sure that we're bringing that ticket size up, since we have seen that ticket size are pretty relatively flat throughout the data set. And then fourth, we're going to place promotions in slower windows, such as late afternoon and Saturdays, instead of discounting demand that is already going to arrive. And then fifth, lastly, we want to make sure that we refresh the forecast regularly. Basically, what we have with the data coming in, we want to make sure that we're pumping that back in so that we have a cadence of where we could continue to make these predictions, and then where we could have the ordering track just to make sure that we are being proactive and we are doing the best that we can to be able to predict this revenue. The broader message is that the data now supports a more intentional operating cadence for the cafe, and if we could stick to this while continue to ingest it with more data, we'll be able to make better predictions over the future for where we should be moving the cafe. So based on the analysis, those 5 moves that I would recommend, the next steps are really going to be tracking those actuals and those forecast dailies. We want to make sure that we do extend to those top 5 products. So the cafe latte, the flat white, and the leading pastries, we want to make sure that we are leading forward with those. And then we want to layer in the calendar effects as well. This also means that we'll roll up to the category level forecast just to make sure that we are predicting where we need to be predicting. One thing that we do want to call out is that there are a couple of limitations here. So external factors are not modeled. That's one of the biggest call outs there. Pattern continuity assumed. We want to make sure that the forecast, it does expect the historical behaviors to broadly continue. Because of that, if there are any kind of different motions that happen, like the cost of beans or something like that does happen to impact the business, we're not really planning for that in our forecast. And then lastly, the Sundays are near 0, so that kind of indicates that there may be a closure or something like along those lines. Since we don't have that data, we can't really make that prediction there. But if we were to capitalize throughout the days of the week that we are right now, it is a possibility that we can test into Sunday to continue to extending that revenue. That is all I have for you guys today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.